1945. Everybody was united. People were saving tin cans, people were saving copper, and everything was ration, at that time. They rationed chews, meat. My brothers were overseas, and they wrote my mother, says that my oldest brother was in the Air Force, and he said they were picking the guys from the Air Force to go into the infantry because they needed people to go fight. In other words, the boots. I mean, they wanted the rifle guys. So some of those guys were being picked out of the Air Force to go into the infantry. So the war was strong in Europe at that time. And so that's one of the reasons, they used to write my mother and tell all the stories and so forth. We were all in the nude going through the exam, and there was a guy from the Marine, there was a guy from the Air Force, and a guy from the Navy, and the Army. And those guys, the draftees, they were going through. He says, he had muscles enough to, he says, hey, you come with me. I mean, Marines or Army, whatever. The Marines tried to pick me up because I had a little muscle on my bones. He said, no, I'm already a Navy guy. He says, I'm a volunteer to the Navy. I'm not a draftee, At that time, we were only 17 and a half, I was 17 and a half when we took off. And we had 8 weeks of boot training. We got separated. He went one way and I went the other way, and I got aboard the USS Kinser ship, personal destroyer. Aboard ship, I was sick for 3 days, seasick. Kid from the desert, going aboard. So we landed up, and they had this in the IEA. We stopped at the IEA first, and they had this little booth with pineapples, pineapples, and a can of pineapples. Boy, those pineapples saved my life. I ate a whole bunch of pineapple to get my system back, I had to train with across the street from the USO. There were big lines of guys going in there for a drink. The early Marines that were there and the early soldiers that were there were taking care of the girls. I mean, in other words, the local boys were jealous, so they were finding dead Marines in the back of the alleys and sailors back of the alley, knifed out by the hoods. At the time that the war was over, I read now that they were going to invade Japan on November 1st, So this is where those Marines that we had were going to go to, you see. But so happened that they dropped the bomb and the war was over. The Marines and everybody was happy. I mean, in other words, everybody was yelling, They came on a PA system because they knew, those guys knew that they were going to be in the big war, in the big invasion, So everybody was happy, I mean, in other words, everybody hugged everybody, and so that was because you're 17 years old, 17 and a half. I was 17 and a half at that time. So you're young kids, all those Marines were young kids. Myself, it was just like myself. They were just, we didn't shave or anything, at that time. After we processed all those people down, we were transferred to Pearl Harbor, and I was messed at arms at that time. Then I became a bosun mate there. In other words, I got graded up there because I was in charge of so many people. And then the drafted ship came back. I mean, in other words, everybody was going back home. Everybody was being discharged. Got back to San Francisco August the 2nd. I went to and ate me a big steak with a big malt. And came back with it. 2 days later, they shipped me to Norman, Oklahoma. This is where I got discharged. Went in, you stayed for the duration. All those guys were coming back. But the regular Navy guys, like that Chief Hogan, they were there. I mean, those guys were out of a job, you know. So, and at one point, those big 4 years, 5 years, 10 years service guys, they in the Navy, they live in the Navy, you know, they like that. They were serving chow halls. You see, in other words, they were out of their jobs. I mean, there was no more jobs. In other words, the ships were being parked, and they didn't know what to do with them. So all those guys were being they had to do something. Well, I just want to say that thanks for the atomic bomb, thanks for Harry Truman, that he decided to do that. I have a friend of ours, Jacob Baraka. He said that they were already bombarding. He was aboard ship and they were bombing one of the islands in Japan, preparing for the landing. But good thing